Okay, let's talk now about drip rates. Infusions that are delivered by gravity flow, they're commonly calculated in drops per minute. The IV tubing is calibrated to deliver a specific number of drops per 1 milliliter, and that's going to be identified by the manufacturer on the outside of the package. Common examples would be 10, 15, or 20 drops per milliliter. There is a micro drip tubing that delivers 60 drops per milliliter. So to calculate the infusion in drops per minute, we simply take the minute rate, as we just calculated in our previous examples, and multiply that by the drop, or you may hear it called the drip factor that's identified on the packaging. So let's look at this same example of where we've talked about infusing 1,000 milliliters of normal saline over 8 hours. First of all, we're going to have the rate of infusion we're going to be calculating for drops per minute. And the IV tubing that we're going to be using states on the outside of the packaging that the calibration is 15 drops per milliliter. So our first step is going to be to calculate the milliliters per hour, as we've done several times now. We've got 1,000 milliliters over 8 hours, and we've determined that that is 125 milliliters per hour. And then we converted that to a minute rate by dividing by 60, and we determined that there were 2.08 milliliters per minute. So the next step in order to determine the drip rate is to simply multiply this number, the 2.08 milliliters per minute, by the drop factor, which in this example was 15. So if we take the 2.08 times 15, we're going to come up with an answer of 31.2. And we would want to round that to a whole number, so we would say that in this example, there are 31 drops per minute. So again, you have some examples. You may want to pause here and work these, and then I'll come back and show you how to work each example. Okay, let's look at these examples. And again, these are going to look familiar to you. We've calculated these basic hourly rates and minutes rates previously. So in the first example, we were to infuse 1,000 milliliters of lactated ringers over 6 hours. And we're told that our tubing delivers 10 drops per minute. So again, starting with the first step in the process is we determine that hourly rate. And we started with 1,000 milliliters over 6 hours. And we determined that in that example, the hourly rate was 166.66. And we next took that number. There's really no need to round in all these intermediate steps. It's best just to leave the number in your calculator and continue on to get to the end number. If you were stopping here to determine an hourly rate, well then yes, you'd round at this point. So we're going to leave the 166.66 repeating, and we're going to divide that by 60 to come up with our minute rate of 2.77. Remember our next step, this was milliliters per minute. Our next step was to take this minute rate and multiply by the drop factor, which in this example is 10. So now we determined that our answer is 27.77. At this point, we do want to round to a whole number. So we know that there are 28 drops per minute using this specific tubing. Okay, in our next example, we were asked to infuse 300 milliliters of normal saline over 2 hours. So we took our 300 milliliters over 2 hours, and we determined that the hourly rate was 150 milliliters per hour. We divided that by 60 to get the minute rate, and we determined that our rate was 2.5 milliliters per minute. We take our minute rate and multiply it by the drop factor, which in this example is a tubing that delivers 20 drops per minute. And our answer then is going to be that we are giving 50 drops per minute. Okay, in our next example, we're asked to infuse 3,000 milliliters over 24 hours, which we determined was an infusion rate of 125 milliliters per hour, which we divided over 60. We put that over 60 to come up with a minute rate of, again, 2.08. We take our minute rate and multiply that by the drop factor on the tubing, which in this example is 15 drops per minute. And so then we come up with 31.2, which was in our example above. So that would be rounded to 31 drops per minute. Our next example was infusing 1,500 milliliters over 12 hours. And again, we came up with 125 milliliters per hour divided by our 60 minutes. We came up with that same 2.08, which is milliliters per minute. And we multiply that by our drop factor, which in this example is 10 drops per minute. So we've determined that there are 20.8 drops per minute. Again, rounding that to the whole number, our answer would be 21 drops per minute. And then our last example, we took 150 milliliters infused over 3 hours that we determined was 50 milliliters per hour divided by 60 to get our minute rate of 0.83. And this time we are using the micro drip tubing, which delivers 60 drops per minute. So we multiply our number by 60 to determine that there are 50 drops per milliliter.